Charities USA. Oop,
That's good.
gotta click the got it button. So, but I represent Catholic Charities USA, and for those today who are not familiar with us, we are the National Association of Catholic Charities Agencies across the United States and the U.S. territories. So we have 167 member agencies, and I was taking note of the folks from our network who I saw logging in before the webinar, and I saw representatives of Catholic Charities, Washington, D.C., Oklahoma City, Lexington, Houston, Arkansas, Cleveland, Youngstown, Ohio, La Crosse, Wisconsin, Cincinnati, Ohio. I know that I missed a few, but I'm delighted to have so many Catholic Charities folks on board. Years ago, I myself was engaged in catechetical ministry and was an active member of the NCCL back when it's the National Conference of Catechetical Leadership, and counted Neil Parent as a friend. But back in those early days in my ministry, I kept on encountering the name of Mike Carotta. Wow, a new resource coming out from Dr. Mike Carotta, or Dr. Mike Carotta is speaking at this. And so a few years ago, when Mike and I were introduced to one another through a common project, we began a conversation that led to the publication of the resource that Mike is going to speak with you about, Wholehearted. Wholehearted was made possible by a very generous donor to Catholic Charities USA, who had a son who she loved very much, who struggled with mental health challenges, and very tragically ended up taking his life. And her frustration was that she felt that her son's parish didn't really know how to respond to not only his tragic death, but also a person struggling with mental health challenges in their midst. And so she approached us and said, what can Catholic Charities do engaging with parishes to destigmatize mental health, to provide a better response, to create trauma-informed parishes? And so one of the ways we are responding to her generosity is through the publication of Wholehearted. As Mike will talk about, it's for parish use, but we also, from the Catholic Charities perspective, hope that this leads to even greater collaboration across a whole swath of ministries and surface areas between parishes and dioceses and local Catholic Charities agencies. So that's part of my hope, and delighted to see Catholic Charities folks and diocesan and parish folks on this webinar together. So without anything further from me, I'm going to hand the baton over to Dr. Mike Carotta.
Hey, everybody. Gosh, I have to say, this is kind of intimidating. I've never had such a large crowd here at a webinar, and the whole technology thing is new to me. I'll try not to blow it up as we go. Just a little bit of a background. After a life in catechetics, maybe 7 years ago, I think it was, I got involved helping the American Bible Society adapt one of their trauma resources for the incarcerated into the Catholic context. And so I spent a couple of years with that. And then they also, they had one for the general public that also needed to be put in a Catholic context. So I found myself for 7 years now working on this new thing for me. And so I want to say up front, I'm not a trauma expert. I'm not a mental health professional. Guarantee there are 2 to 4 dozen of you that are on this webinar. I'll try not to mess it up. I could use a little grace on that, I think. But my first degree was in psych, so I understand the language. It makes sense to me. And more than anything else, all my years in parish life tells me this is a good thing at the right time. So before we get started, how about if we just take a moment to ask for the Lord's blessing upon us. Good and gracious God, you know our hearts and you know the hearts of those we serve. Bless our time together in these days and in this hour. Give us insight, give us hope, and give us a sense of your spirit. Give us sensitivity and courage, and may what we do please you and serve our people well. We ask this in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Let's see. All right. All right. I imagine you can see that, guys. I want to start by saying this is not all that new. I noticed that the Catholic Conference of Bishops in Scotland, prior to the pandemic, began to explore the topic of becoming a trauma-informed church. If you enter this in your browser, you're going to get 7 million results right away. It's a thing. My first attempt at it was with God bless Kevin Prevost in the Diocese of Dallas. They let me test it several years ago. I think I stunk, but at least I got my feet wet on it. So they've been looking at it as well. Here's some trauma-informed workshop that came out of the Catholic Charities group in Arlington, Virginia, back 7, 8 years ago. Church literature started talking about trauma, and so it's not that new, but for us, I think it is. And as you can intuit yourself, it's very new. Again, I'm not a trauma pro, but I think I can do a 101 for all of us on what do we mean by trauma. Trauma is not does not refer to the event. Trauma speaks to the impact on one's mind and emotions. It's a damage that results from a distressing event, and it exceeds our ability to cope or to integrate the emotions with that experience. Trauma is not permanent if it's addressed. It can come from one event, it can come from several events, but everyone seems to agree there's a feeling of being overwhelmed. And sometimes we know it, and sometimes we don't, and someone has to point it out to us. Everybody reacts differently to trauma. Some people may get traumatized by this and that, while some of us may not. Not everyone experiences trauma the same way or from the same result. I think this is kind of helpful. There are people who refer to catastrophic events as big T trauma, and more normal events or ordinary events as small T trauma. Again, trauma refers to the impact on us, not the event. But sometimes we are traumatized by accidents, criminal activities, violence, violation, etc., catastrophes, disasters. And sometimes we're traumatized by a series of what you and I would call ordinary things that overwhelm us. Everybody seems to think that, for lack of a better word, overwhelming seems to be the word we use when we refer to trauma. And there's several. There's acute trauma that comes from a single event. There's chronic trauma that's the result of repeated and prolonged acts. It could be caring for an aging parent, all right, while also trying to pay bills. Complex trauma is exposure to multiple traumatic events, often invasive, usually interpersonal. And then there's secondary trauma, which I find very interesting. That refers to how we can be traumatized, remember, overwhelmed, impaired by observing another's trauma, another's pain. And then we all know about moral trauma, which stems from being involved directly or tangentially with something that violates our conscience. And we hear a lot about that from the military, as you know. Can't underestimate what we call adverse childhood experiences. I want to talk just a little bit about that. This is a thing, and we can't talk about trauma without referring to what we call ACEs. For those of you that don't know, there's an inventory of 10 questions. Each one is a yes or no answer. And what the data seems to tell us is that 67% of the population has at least one adverse childhood experience, or ACE. The more childhood experiences that are adverse, the worse the predictor for our adult health. You will see that those of us that have been subjected to adverse childhood experiences before we're 18 have a higher level of drug abuse, premarital sex, recreational sex, liver damage, depression, etc. On the other hand, I want to be able to say that, like anything, it's being really examined by the mental health community now. And we have to be careful not to sort of label someone or ourselves by our score on the ACE. You know, it's like, this is not the Myers-Briggs, right? I remember working with a priest friend who was doing a lot of recovery work in addiction work. And he once said to me, gosh, we gave the ACE inventory to our people, and most of them had 5, and some of them had 7, and some of them had 4. And I thought, oh, we're categorizing people by a score on a test. So a little bit of balance here, but you cannot underestimate the power of the negative impact of adverse childhood experiences of trauma. The Institute of Mental Health says this is what trauma looks like. And it's common knowledge now. It has to do with flashbacks or bad dreams or night terrors or frightening thoughts. We tend to avoid places or events or objects that trigger or remind us of something that's traumatic. We can be tense, we can be on edge, we can be easily angered, we can find ourselves aggressive, more so than usual. Sleep disturbance is a big part of trauma. As I'll talk about in a minute, trauma affects our brain. That's a fact. And we'll get to that in a minute. We also can have negative thoughts about ourselves and the world. We can have feelings of guilt, shame, and blame. Most everyone agrees that if there's a common denominator among all forms of trauma, it seems to lead to isolation. Those of us that are dealing with trauma tend to find ourselves isolating ourselves. Our worlds keep getting smaller and smaller. In fairness, not every pain is traumatic. There is such a thing as stress-related growth. So I don't want to sugarcoat trauma, but I also want to nod to the fact that there are those who have found that there is such a thing as stress-related growth. And when I heard that and studied that, I thought, well, it reminds me of one of my favorite poems by Robert Browning Hamilton. Again, I'm not saying that trauma is a good thing, but I also want to acknowledge for the mental health people in fairness that there is such a thing as stress-related growth. Can you all see that? This is a study now by Barner. Barner is a rather evangelical research group that surveys a lot of the attitudes and behaviors of Christians across the denominations. And prior to the pandemic, they surveyed 1,000 churchgoers, and they call their survey Trauma in America. And you should be able to see that 20% of practicing Christians report a traumatic experience. 40% of them say their trauma was death of a loved one. A third said it was betrayal by a trusted individual. So that could be anything from an affair to something online, but there was a big sense of betrayal by someone they trusted. A fourth of them said they were traumatized by forms of abuse, whether that was domestic abuse, physical abuse, or sexual abuse. I want to stop for a minute and say, remember big T and little t? I'm struck by how 40% of the Christians who said they were experienced trauma came from death of a loved one. And so Sunday, when you go to church and you look at a pew and you see 5 people, one of every 5 is going to, this is prior to pandemic, is going to say they're going to report they were traumatized from everything from death of a loved one to betrayal to something criminal or violent or catastrophic. This book, The Body Keeps the Score, I looked at it this Sunday at the New York Times again, 4 years on the bestseller list of the New York Times. And Dr. Van der Kolk says, and he's proven it beyond a doubt, trauma impacts the nervous system and the brain. This book dives deep into it, and I couldn't comprehend all of it, right? But it's documented. Basically, in simplest terms, trauma affects our nervous system and our brain for sure. And what is meant to work regularly gets impaired, slowed down, doesn't function much. Conversely, aspects of our nervous system and our brain that should only work occasionally, let's just say when we're frightened, gets activated. So we have some part of our brain is not working as it should, and some is overworking, okay? Those that were surveyed by Barner reported classic cases of trauma. They ruminate on traumatic events, they're anxious, they've changed the way they've eaten, they get aggressive, irritable, and that's a third of them. And 25% of the folks surveyed said they engage in self-destructive behaviors, whether it's substance abuse or self-harm. Sleep disturbance has the largest impact of all the symptoms. 73% of those surveyed who said they had sleep disturbance also reported aggressiveness, irritability, and some of the other issues, including helplessness and hopelessness. 77% reporting these physical symptoms also said they had high anxiety, report a loss of interest, and also alcohol and substance abuse. Who do they turn to? The parishioners in this, it'll be the survey, 1,000 people, 2020. Over half of the Christians said they turned to God. 39% said family, 37% said friends, others said counselors, 25% looked at self-help books, and 25% looked at the local church. My wife and I were talking about this just this morning. Later, we're going to talk about wholehearted, right? But in terms of a parish trying to become more trauma aware, this gives us a little bit of a roadmap. What we're trying to do is help the local church respond to the existing need of its members who are already looking to God for spiritual help. We're not trying to trump family, trump friends or counselors. We're just trying to say there's a spiritual hunger people have as they try to move through trauma. They're not looking to the church. Can we as a church address their spiritual interest? I said I had a degree in psych, and so I have to be fair here. Mental health folks, understandably, are nervous when those of us in church work get into the lane of trauma-informed care. This is my picture of a therapist rolling her eyes because they know that sometimes it's tossed around in very glib ways. In fact, they prefer that we don't call ourselves trauma-informed parishes, because that implies, rightly so, that we really are trained. So I say, let's from now on, let's refer to ourselves as trauma-aware. We cannot do what mental health can do much better. I want to repeat that. We cannot do what mental health is far more equipped to do. But we can do what mental health does not do normally. And that is integrate spirituality and religious practices with good mental health information and exercises. I'm struck by some of our spiritual assets that relate to trauma. Within our Catholic expression, here are some things that automatically relate to getting through trauma. Mystery, trust in a higher power, the experience of grace, practices of prayer. Again, these are the things that mental health doesn't speak to normally, but we can. This is our contribution. Tribulation, lamentation. By the way, I mentioned earlier working with the American Bible Society. I learned from them the power of the lamentation exercise as part of what we can do for one another as we help ourselves get through trauma. Sacramentality and ritual. The mental health folks actually tell us that the use of symbol instead of language, the use of ordered gestures that make up our rituals are calming, are therapeutic. Some of you know Dr. Mark Martoisa, who is the chancellor at the Catholic Military Archdiocese. He did his doctoral work on post-traumatic syndrome and came back and said, this is one of his findings, that the power of sacramentality, because it's not heavily depending on verbal expression, and the power of ritual is legit in mental health world. We believe in the spirit. We look at a cross and the trauma of a cross every time we go to church. Paschal mystery is huge. It's in wholehearted. This is a key concept that says we don't know why, but in the Christian life, there's going to be experiences of pain and chaos and loneliness and loss. But we believe it also is followed by new beginnings and new life. Life of faith. God is a creator of seasons, and sometimes I can be in a hellacious season or a cold season, but the weather will change. We have social teachings that talk about the dignity of the human, common good. So here are some questions we tend to ask, right? These are the traditional questions our parishes tend to ask. How do we get more people involved in our stuff? How can we get them to show up? Where the heck are the dang parents? And how do we get everybody more excited about their faith? I pose these questions because now that we're talking about becoming a trauma-aware community, there's another question that we must address. And that question is this. So the ones on the left here are legit, right? But if we're going to make a shift, we have to also address this question. How can we better help our people? Francis said, the church will have to initiate everyone, priest, religious, and laity, into the art of accompaniment. I'm struck by the word art of accompaniment, which teaches us to remove our sandals before the sacred ground of the other. So here are three things in my mind. By the way, this is all going to be on a handout, which John has already posted in the chat room where you can get it. In case you want to share this with your parish staff back home, you can use the handout. It's got two sides to it. Three things. I think a trauma-aware parish does this: demonstrates awareness of and sensitivity to trauma's impact on its members and their loved ones. Demonstrates awareness and sensitivity to trauma's impact on its members and their loved ones. Helps parishioners recognize their experience of and response to trauma. Demonstrates awareness and sensitivity, helps parishioners recognize their experience of and response to trauma. And thirdly, provides restorative, spiritual, and professional resources in a variety of ways. Raises some questions. How are we going to do this? These are three things. How do we do these three things? And who will do it? How do we avoid reducing this to simply making the parish more welcoming? I remember doing a webinar like this early on, and someone said, this is a solution. We'll just have people in the back of the church who greet everybody and are more welcoming. And I'm like, oh no, this is way more than that now. I mean, it's good, but that's not trauma awareness. How do we take seriously ACEs, right? Adverse childhood experiences, without, and I'm going to be real clear about this, without morphing once again from an adult-centered opportunity to making it another children's initiative. I'm of the belief that this is something we should be doing with adults. I'm not downplaying children or freshmen in high school or young adolescents, but I'm saying this is an adult thing. We tend, those of us in church work, we tend to go right away, put our eggs into the childhood ministry. And finally, how can those who are facilitating trauma programs manage group dynamics? And more importantly, how can we help maintain a sturdy, trustworthy space where people can do the difficult and intimate work of inner examination, of recognition, renewal, and restoration? Couple things. Notice how this parish, this tri-parish in New Jersey, describes himself on their bulletin. Holy Family Parish calls themselves a trauma-informed community. Well, heck, I called them up. What are you guys doing? Turns out that this parish's ministry really includes a lot of refugees who are needing services and who have been traumatized by the travel, the trip, the transition, the persecution they faced. And so this is a difference. This is not a normal situation, but it does lead to maybe our first step. So I'll do a few things here. I'll make a few suggestions. I want to own that these are my suggestions. We'll kick it back to small group to hear your own thoughts, okay? Here are my 2 cents. First thing, suppose we name it. Suppose we simply add a statement to our mission statement, a sentence or two, like, we are also aware that life can sometimes be painful and overwhelming, and we seek to support one another during these times. Or, we're aware that life can sometimes be painful and overwhelming. We're a community of support and sanctuary for one another during these times. You get the idea? Just add this, but naming it begins to move us down this path, holds us accountable, and moves us down this path. Veterans Day. An Episcopal church in Austin, Texas, has an evening of reflection, what they call the pilgrimage for veterans. Perfect example. Veterans Day. If we're a trauma-aware congregation, why don't we have a service, an evening service for veterans? Some of you know Tom Tomasek, dear friend. A couple of months ago, in the month of November, his parish, Our Lady of the Lake in Lake Oswego in Oregon, had a mass for deceased children. Perfect example of trying to be a more trauma-aware congregation. You can't see it, but in front of these candles was a little book where those in attendance could come in and write down the names of the deceased children that they wanted to remember and celebrate, pray for. On one hand, we're a worship and wisdom community, and we promote evangelization, catechesis, and discipleship, right? My life's been devoted to this ministry. This hand of proclamation is, to me, our dominant hand, right? This is mostly what we've been about. If we're going to look at what it means to be a parish that is trauma aware, we have to say that catechesis, evangelization, missionary discipleship doesn't apply here. This is the other hand. And I say this because so many of us have an interest and a passion for evangelization, catechesis, discipleship. But that passion is not something you can place on this ministry. This is a different hand. To become a trauma-aware parish, we need to use this hand, the hand of listening. And I kind of like to say, when you use both hands, we can fully embrace our people, not just with faith formation and catechesis, but with this art of accompaniment that Francis talks about. Francis went on to say, we need to practice the art of listening, which is more than simply it's an openness which makes possible closeness, without which genuine spiritual encounter cannot come. This woman, Diane Langberg, she is the matriarch of faith-based trauma awareness for congregations. She's highly regarded. She is the leader. In one of her recent books, Suffering in the Heart of God, she says that she was finally asked this question. When do we let people know the healing love of Jesus? How do we share that with this person? When do we do that? And this matriarch said, I can't say this strongly enough. It's the last thing you ought to do. You ought to listen. She went on to say, in my experience, living out godly characteristics in front of victims helped them see God in the flesh. Again, my 2 cents, parishes should look at it as good-hearted people who are suffering heart wounds of the heart. And these heart wounds cause people to feel isolated, unable to communicate as clearly as they used to, physically impaired, anxious, hypervigilant, discouraged, disinterested, and or spiritually numb. I'll tell you a quick story, and then we're going to go to small group. Quick story. So I'm going to go give this talk at the LA Congress a couple years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. I go to Great Clips. In my neighborhood, that's really Great Clips. All old people like me go. I see the lady who's cutting my hair, same one who cut it last time. I said, hey, last time I was here, you had a bad day. You know, you told me your boyfriend left you. She said, oh, karma's a interesting thing, she says. I heard that last night he got a car wreck. He left me, but he got in a car wreck. She said, I can't understand it. She said, they said he was doing drugs, but as long as I was with him, he never did. I don't know what's going on. I said, look, I just need a trim. I don't want to look like I got a haircut. I got to give a talk. Just give me a little trim. What are you talking about? She says. I said, I'm talking about trauma. To who? A conference of Catholic parishioners and volunteers and lay leaders. And she said, true story. She said, they need to hear it. When my mom died, Father so-and-so said, God knew what was best. How could he say that? That was 12 years ago, she said. I was 22. And she said, quote, I wasn't even me yet. I just wanted to be heard, she said. I didn't want to be told that God knew what was best. I asked, how did your mom pass? She committed suicide. Now, I want to stop for a minute and say, I'm not sure. In fact, if I had to bet, I would bet that Father so-and-so never said God knew what was best. Here's the thing. When someone is traumatized, you don't know what they're hearing because they're not processing it. We're not processing it accurately. I can't communicate some things accurately. I can't give you a correct sequence of events, and I can't hear things. So I'm not sure. In fact, I'm almost positive he didn't say that, but that's what she heard. All the more reason, listen before we speak. So here we go. I'll do this. We'll go into small groups. John, you about ready? Here we go. 4 dynamics. I think for those of us that want to accompany people who are experiencing trauma, we should attend to stories. What happened? How did you feel? What's been the hardest part? This is all on the handout, by the way. Honor the impact. Respect the debilitation and hold it reverently. Don't try to judge it. Don't fix it. Don't minimize it. Promote restoration. This is encouraging. This is the point where you've listened, you're honoring the impact. Can you find the art of encouraging? This is the work, and it's their work. Point toward a specific act, a practice, or a step forward. How about if we go out for coffee on Tuesday? How about Saturday we go get a lunch? You know, maybe I'll pick you up. I'll take you to class this time. How about if I come over and maybe we pay the bills together? Or we go get groceries so you can go back to eating. So you promote restoration. You offer solidarity. It's about keeping company. It's about letting them know that you will journey with them. They may or may not accept it, but it's important that they are aware of the quality of your presence. What's it look like in a parish? My 2 cents. If a parish attends the stories, that means that in the readings, we'll find homilies that will integrate stories of pain and suffering and hard times, that we'll coach that out of readings occasionally, that there'll be articles in a bulletin or on a website about dealing with hard times. Remember, we said there were 3 things. One of them is demonstrate awareness. And this is one way to do that. Honoring the impact. Avoid easy remedies. Scott wrote a book. Scott Hurd, Catholic Charities, wrote a book on forgiveness. Please, we have to handle the call to forgiveness with great care. Those of us in church work, we tend to stress right away, forgive, forgive. A, that's not easy. B, that's tricky because you don't want to say re-enter an abusive relationship. You don't want to say minimize the pain that someone has caused you. So yeah, we want to forgive, but you've got to be careful how we promote that. Promote restoration. And this is where we come in now. Trauma awareness or wellness seminars. This is something we can do. This is what Wholehearted does. We'll do that after the break. But we're not support groups. We're not singling out people. This is something we're doing for all, because all of us either have experienced trauma or we have loved ones who are experiencing trauma, whether they're family members or workers. Then we create prayer exercises. meditation? Can we offer opportunities for spiritual practices? Can we provide a list of local mental health counselors or services provided to Catholic Charities? And can we offer solidarity? By that, I mean specifically, can we say that our place is a sanctuary for you? You can get spiritual strength and comfort here. You can do it alone, or we can do it together. I want to stop right here and say this. I remember I posted a question, who's going to do all this? And in my mind, this is win-win-win. And I'd like your opinion on it when you break into small groups, perhaps. When it comes to promoting restoration, for example, and people doing wellness seminars or offering different kind of prayer experiences or meditation, contemplation, adoration, etc., I want to be able to say, those of us already engaged in parish ministry can't do that. We're swamped. But I think because this is not catechetical and it's not that sort of instructional approach, I think there's going to be a new cadre of people who will step up. They're not, for some reason or 100 reasons, they're not comfortable being catechists, but they wouldn't mind doing some of the wellness stuff and leading that. So I think we're going to get, first of all, we're going to help our people. Secondly, in a new way. Secondly, I think we're going to get a new influx of volunteers. And thirdly, I think the parish's relationship with some of its people will be enhanced. So before we do Wholehearted and all that stuff, and I'll take you through it, and it's a free resource from Catholic Charities, I want to go back and say, John, if you don't mind, why don't you break everybody into groups and maybe give us like 5 minutes to simply just share in our small groups. What are your thoughts about all this so far? What are your thoughts? What seems intriguing? What seems maybe too daunting? What questions might you have? But in general, what are your thoughts so far? John, if you would, please break everybody up.
Yes, people are going to be in groups. I'll put you into groups, and we'll give you a warning to come back. But let's think about 10 minutes so you can share around that. And then when you come back, put comments and questions into the chat. That way we'll be able to respond to those. So enjoy the conversation with somewhere around, I'm going to guess about 5 people in your group. Those who wanted to move to groups, move to groups. So there's a few people who have not moved to groups yet. So if you have not moved to a group, by all means, feel free to join a group. And if you'd rather just take a break and wait for the next part, that's fine too.
John, has recording stopped? No, it's on.
It's on. I'm going to